Welcome to today's First Chesapeake Chat session. I'm Victoria Mulvihill, and I'm here to introduce the First Chesapeake Chat sponsored by Newport News Shipbuilding. I would like to thank this session's sponsor, ShowBest, for making this chat possible. Just some housekeeping, we will let the speakers present and then open up for discussion questions later on if there is time. The session today is Learn Something New, Introduction to Airtable, and how to use it to build a simple database for scouting purposes. And I will now pass it over to our speakers from Team 1885 iLight, Caroline and Kian, to introduce themselves.
Hello. Hi, I'm Caroline. I am the current Scouting and Strategy Lead for iLight Robotics Team 1885.
Hello, I'm Kian. I'm an alum of the team, and I used to be the strategy lead where we really founded it, and I got to really teach Caroline everything I know, which is pretty cool.
So today we are going to talk about how to build a really simple database to use for scouting at FRC events using an online application called Airtable. So we can just switch right over to that now and get going. All right, so this is what Airtable is going to look like when you open it. This is like home base. And to create a base, which is where we're going to be working in, you just click this helpful add a base button. And I'm going to start from scratch. So we can change the name, change the color, the icon, whatever we want here. And I'm going to name it Chesapeake Chat. And then we're going to open it up. So this environment here is our database, and currently it only has one table in it, and I'm just going to real quick go over some terminology. So the database is going to include any of the tables that we add here, and each table is composed of columns and rows, obviously. Columns can also be referred to as attributes or fields is really common in Airtable, and rows can also be instances. I'm going to go ahead and delete all these rows, also called records, and delete these columns because it preloads them and I don't really want them. So now we are going to rename this one to be match data. So the structure of this database is we're going to have two tables, match data, and then another table for team data. So team data is where we're going to sort of aggregate everything. So that's where we're going to be able to see averages, the useful information about teams. And then in match data is where we track the individual team's performance in each match. And I think that will become more clear as we go. So first thing I'm going to do is in the team data, we are going to change this primary field to be the team number, because that is how we identify teams. And we can change the data type. You have a lot of choices here. Your choices are more restricted when it's the primary field, because that one's a little special. But Airtable is designed to be used in lots of different ways. It has a lot of flexibility. So you have a lot of different data types you can work with. And I'm just going to change this number format and then save it. And there we go. And then we're going to go over to match data and do something similar. We're going to change the, change the primary field here to be match number, and then also make that an integer. And if you're familiar with relational databases, you might be like, whoa, slow down. You can't call match number the primary field if it's not going to be unique, because we are going to have 6 different entries per match because there's 6 different teams playing. Airtable is not a true relational database, so it will let me have match number be the unique identifier because it just does. And we don't really worry about it because we're not trying to reference individual rows from match data using just the match number ever. So it ends up working out okay. And instead of adding in my columns here like you would in a normal database setup where it sort of looks like a spreadsheet, I'm going to instead make a different view. So we have our grid view already, and now I'm going to make a form view, which is going to look really similar to Google or Microsoft Forms if you've worked with those before. So it's really easy to work with. It's very intuitive. It's one of the reasons I love Airtable. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename the form So this is our scouting form, and what this is going to end up being is what you actually send out to your scouts. So you can just give them a link, and then they can enter in the data for the matches that they're assigned to scout, and everything is nice and easy. So we already have one field here because we created that in the grid view. So now we're going to create some more fields, and we're going to start with an example. So if you want to be able to indicate that a team didn't show up, we're going to have that ability. And you have a lot of different data types to choose from. So for this one, I like to have it be a checkbox. And for the purposes of this lesson, I'm not going to focus too much on what is strategic, the strategy side of it, in terms of what data do you want to track and things like that. I'm going to focus more on the technical side of actually creating the database so that you can implement that strategy. So here we have this. This field has been added, and if we go back to the grid view, we can see that that column was added there. So that means we can construct everything in the scouting form view, and then it will be there for us in the grid view too. So the next thing we're going to do, which is sort of the database component, it's how we're going to connect match data to team data, is we're going to add a field. We're going to call it team number, and it is going to be a link type. So this is going to allow us to link to another record in team data. And I actually forgot to do this. In team data, don't save. In team data, you're going to have to preload it with all of the teams that are attending your event. So I'm going to go ahead and put a few teams in here. Keon might add a few. We can just get some teams in there. And then when we come back over here, and I'm going to fix this, we can make that team number what it was supposed to be. Let's try that again. Okay, change that to team number and change the field type, change the name there too, to be linked to another record, and we want to link it to team data. So because we only want to be scouting one team per match, per form, we do not want to allow linking to multiple records, so we're going to turn that off. Save that. I'm going to move it up here because this is how I usually have it. I would probably have scout name up there too, because it's just useful to know who is submitting the data that you're working with. So we have match number, team number, NoShow. I'm going to add a few more fields if we want to track numerically, like how many game pieces did they score. That's super easy. So we can say power cells scored in the low goal and make that a number type. And I'm going to change the format again. And it's really important to put a default here. If you don't make this field required, so you can make it required, and then that would force your scouts to enter a number, even if it's 0. But my scouts get really mad at me when I have a lot of required fields. So I just like to have the default be 0, because happy scouts scout better. So we're going to do another field of a similar type for power cells scored high. So this is obviously going based off of what a form might have looked like for the 2020 game. Whoops, I did not put a default there. So it's important to remember your default. Otherwise, you're going to have not clean data. So another data type that I use really often is multiple select or single select. And this is just going to look like a multiple choice question for your scouts. The only difference is how many of the options are they allowed to pick. So I'm going to make this be a single select because I want to know what state the team ended the game in. And I'm going to add my options. Maybe they did a hang in the middle. Maybe they parked. And again, I'm not going to have an option that's like none of the above. I'm just going to assume an empty field is none of the above. If you want to have a bit more control over your data and like force your scouts to look closer, you might want to make that required and then have an option that says like none of the above. But that is up to your preference and also how you train your scouts and how you do stuff like that. So now we can open up our form and see what it looks like. Can you guys see that? I think I messed that up. Okay, so we've got our scouting form, and this is what it looks like on the scout side. So we can enter some sample data. Match number 1, team 1885. We're not going to check that because they did show up. Let's see, they scored 5 power cells in the low and then 15 power cells in the high.
Sorry to interrupt, but we cannot see your screen currently. I think you can share a new tab if you want.
Okay. That's my
you
bad.
Got it.
Okay. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
All right, so this is what the scouting form would look like on the scout side. Once you send them the link to access it, they cannot modify it. They can just submit data through it. So that's a sort of added layer of protection. You're not giving your entire team the ability to change around this important stuff. So I'm just putting in some sample data and then we're going to submit the form. So say we parked at the end and submit it. So now let me change which screen I'm sharing. Okay, now when we go back here, we go back to the grid view. We can see that that data populated really nicely. The one further step that we should probably take on the scouting form is adding descriptions for each of the fields just to make it really clear. You should also definitely be training your scouts, making sure they're comfortable with your system so that it's really easy for them. But it also helps to have descriptions on each of your fields just in case someone forgets or they have a question. For example, a really common one is what do you do if they shoot and miss if you don't have a separate field for that, depending on how you set it up. So where do you want to count what things, stuff like that. So if Keon would do me a favor and enter some more data, that would be really nice while we set up the team data side of it. Before I move on to the team data side, does anyone have any questions about setting up your match data side of it?
I don't see any questions currently, but I like the usage of Team 346. That's my team. That was my former team.
Just the first random few that popped into my head. So, all right, moving on to the team data side of it. So we have this new column here, which we didn't put here, and you can see the data being updated live as Keon fills out the forms. So this represents the link between the match data table and the team data table, and it's going to allow us to do math with the data in the other table, which is really cool. That's the advantage of having this database structure. So it is important, though, I will reiterate that you have to load in all the team numbers here. Another way you can do that is if you pull the data from the Blue Alliance or wherever you're doing, you can import that spreadsheet so you don't have to type in all the team numbers, or you can just make a freshman type in all the team numbers. I'm just kidding. But if you don't enter these in here, then when your scouts go to submit the scouting form, they won't have any options in the team data link field, which will be frustrating for them. So we're going to make a new column. We're going to start aggregating our data. And there are 2 different data types that we can use here. We can use a formula or a roll-up, and they're pretty similar, but the biggest difference is that a formula only operates on other columns within the same table, whereas a roll-up allows you to use the link that you've made to do math on the columns from the other table. So we're going to roll up, and we are going to say I want to know the average number of power cells that every team scores in the low goal. So I'm going to give it a quick little name. And the options here are really confusing at first. So the field on this table, the links to the records you want to summarize, means we want to pick this field, which is what has the links to these matches. So that is already selected there. And then now we need to choose which field from this other table do we want to be operating on. So since we're trying to figure out the average number of power cells that they score in the low goal, we are going to choose power cells scored low. Now we want to put in the aggregation formula, which is going to be, your options are very similar to what you're going to have with Excel and Google Sheets. And it also gives you a little helpful suggestions here. So average of values is exactly what we want. So when we save that, there we go. We're getting the average number of power cells that these teams are scoring. And if we look at the match data, that should probably look right. And another thing that I would recommend doing is changing the formatting, because even though we want integer results when you're submitting the form, because you can't score half a power cell or anything like that, having a decimal with a precision of 2 or 3 places after the decimal is going to give you more insight when you're getting sort of wacky values. And you saw down there briefly that field was NaN, which stands for not a number, because we were trying to divide by 0 because 614 didn't have any matches entered yet. So you're going to get NaNs when you try to do some illegal math. So we can do average power cell high the same way. Do a roll up of that column and just do average values. So it's really quick and easy to set these up. As you can see, this is almost ready to be used during an event pretty much. I didn't change the precision on that one, but it's okay. We're just going to leave it. A different type of way to roll up is if we have this no-show column, which is a checkbox. So it's like true or false, basically. Or it's not actually true or false. It's filled or empty. So we can roll that up in a slightly different way. If we wanted the percent of the time a team doesn't show up, percentage no-show, then we're going to roll up. And you can search through the different field types in that area there. And we want to roll up the no-show column. And then we can't just say like average of this because it's not a numerical value field. So I think it would just get really mad if we tried that. But we have all these count functions right beneath it, which I use very often. Sum, count, all these ones are really useful. And we have 3 different count functions that we're going to use, and the differences are very helpfully described underneath here. So this will just count any value, any cell that has a number. This will count any cell that has anything in it as long as it's not empty. And count all will just count the total number of cells even if they're empty. So the way that we can do this percentage to know the percent of a time that a team didn't show up to their match, we can just do count A divided by count all, and then make sure we change the formatting to a percentage. And if we save that, we should see. So team 254 has played 2 matches, and in one of them, 50% of them, they didn't show up. So that is how metrics like that are going to work. So you could continue to do this for fields and fields and fields. Another cool analysis tool, which is actually in the match data table, is if you want to analyze this data as individual pieces, you can come down here and it's automatically set to sum, but you can change this to see what is the median score. It's 4. Do the range, 13. You can also do, and you have a few other like statistics tools there. I really like the histogram because it shows you visually how much different teams are scoring. So I like to set these ones to histogram. And so that's just another cool little feature. And then back over here on the team data side, we can make another view. This is the view that I really like to use when it comes to alliance selection time. You can make a gallery view. So this is going to allow us to see our data not as rows, but as these little cards. And you can customize which fields you see. So I don't really care about seeing the links to the match data table. So I'm just going to uncheck that. And I want to see these 3 roll-ups, which I calculated. So now I can see those stats on every team, and I can sort them by that. So I can sort by, I want to see who scores the most power cells at the top. So 1885 scores the most power cells on average, with an average of 10, followed by 614 with an average of 4, according to our sample data set. And then you can pick another field to sort by, so that if you have ties, you can choose a tiebreaker. You can also do filters, where if you want to just see one team, you could do that. You can also do where like the percentage of no-show is greater than or equal to, or sorry, less than or equal to 25. Let's see, we don't want teams who haven't showed up to more than a quarter of their matches. So you can do things like that. And then when you add filters, you can make it be and or, which is useful. And that is a brief little overview of Airtable. That's going to get you going to a position where you can use Airtable for match strategy because it's updated live. Ooh, that is one disclaimer. It is that when you're working with Airtable, because it is an online system, it requires internet access. So a lot of FRC event venues unfortunately do not have internet access. So at those events, Airtable is obviously not an option. But at events where you do have internet access, Airtable is really sweet because your scouts have a nice, easy time with the form, and then you can access all the data is updated live. So you can use it for match strategy. You can use it for alliance selection strategy. One quick other thing I want to do before we do some questions is show you that you can actually export this as a CSV. So you can download it and then work with your data. Probably going to download the match data sheet. You can work with it in Excel or however you usually would. So that was my brief little intro to Airtable. And do we have any questions?
Yeah, you did such a great job. I was learning a lot. I wish this was something that my team would use. But we had one question submitted that was, how does your scouting change when the internet at competitions is bad?
Keon, do you want to talk on that?
Yeah, so one of the really, I guess, fortunate things that we had when we were scouting is a lot of our students like used their phone data, which was really really helpful, really fortunate that we didn't have to rely on the data as much. And if not, like one of the, I guess, back systems we used is we made handout copies just in case if something were to happen, we could do it handout and fill it. And then we would have someone on an Excel sheet really putting everything together. And then later on, we would put them all back into Airtable where we can really use everything and then export it into a spreadsheet and just look at the spreadsheets and break it down from there, just so that we always have an option no matter the scenario.
That's good. I was wondering, you might have said it earlier, but I missed it. How do you share this form with members of your team? Is it like, are they all able to access the same thing that you were seeing, or is it working like a Google Doc, or is it working more of like a, here's your form and then work through that?
That's a great question. So there actually is a way. I can actually show you if you still have my screen up. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. When you're in the form view, you can share the form, and that will give you a link, which would just give them access to, the view of the form where they're not able to edit it structurally. But if you wanted to share the base with people, you can do that up here with this share button. So you can give people access to the entire database and give them different permission levels. If you want, you can also share the entire workspace if you want. So if we have a team workspace for the year, then we'll make sure everyone who's going to be involved with scouting and strategy has access to that, because then they'll have access to every base within the workspace. And you can even share just one view if you really wanted to. So I can share just this view with someone if I only want them to be able to see and have access to this, and I don't want them to have access to anything else. So lots of things we can do with sharing it.
Got it.
Yeah, just add on to what Caroline said. One of the things that was really helpful was that as a team we used Slack when I was on the team, and we would put the links in the Slack channel just in case of, like, we don't have to constantly have like people ask and then trying to send it back over and back and forth. So you just put in the Slack channel, everyone has access to it, which was really helpful too.
That's really cool. Another question I was wondering is, like, I know it happens. Data gets entered in incorrectly, or, you know, some people accidentally have the wrong team number selected for like the match. So is it easy to adjust like the data within this program, or is it kind of like you have to delete everything and then, you know, do it again?
It's super easy. It's super nice. So I can actually do an example of that, I guess. So if we go back and we review the match and we realize that, wait a minute, this match record wasn't supposed to be for team 614. It was supposed to be for team 1885. I can just put an X there and then add in 1885, and then that corrects it. And then same thing with if there was anything inaccurate, like if 1885 actually didn't score any in the low, I can just come in here and edit that to fix it all up. So it's really easy to work with in that way. And that is part of the scouting / strategy lead's job on our team, is to check through the data and make sure that everything is making sense. Like, someone's average didn't shoot up because you accidentally had 100 things scored when it was only 10, something like that.
And the other nice thing onto that is, if you notice that like you're going through the team data and the gallery view that Caroline was talking about earlier, if you notice that one of the matches may seem like kind of weird, you can go into the gallery, click on a team, and you'll see the individual matches, and you can click on it and it takes you to that match's record as she's shown right now.
That's really cool. One quick last question we had, we only have like 3 minutes, so we have to make it short, but was, how do those multiple selection fields work when we're calling data?
All right, so when we go back to the match data field and we look at the form, I'm gonna real quick just change endgame to a multiple select field type, because right now it's just single select. So the only difference with multiple select is that you can pick multiple options. So when you're processing those, it actually gets more complicated when you're trying to do the aggregation, and I chose not to do that in this video because I didn't think we'd have time. But you basically have to make a helper column that's gonna, inside your match data grid view, is going to just be 1 if a certain condition is met. So like 1 if they parked, 0 if they didn't park, and then a separate field, 1 if they hanged, 0 if they didn't hang. And then you aggregate that column in the team data to determine how much they actually complete that part of the game.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just wondering as well. Okay, one last question really quick, and then we've got to wrap it up. But is there a way to take a field like endgame, which has park and hang, and convert it to points?
Yes. So you can also do that if you download the CSV and then work with it in Excel. That's a pretty easy way to do it. But what you can do in the grid view, when you make a column, you could make that a formula. So you already have a field representing how often they complete that task. You could then make it a formula where you multiply that by the point value. And you can do a lot of stuff with formulas, very similar to Excel. So
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much. You guys did a great job, and it's a really useful tool that, I mean, I think with with our data and like getting signal and everything through those events would be really helpful. And just once again, I would like to thank you all and iLight and for your advice. And I think that we all learned something really useful. And I want to thank today's sponsor, Show Best, and have a great rest of your day.